It has been far too long, Raven, and I miss you guys. Miss you too, Fox. I finally had time between everything going on in my life to share one of the many crazy stories that happened recently, and this one is from a couple of months ago. I don't know who might be triggered by this story because it does deal with some racism and what might be considered an attempted kidnapping and or homicide, but rest assured that everyone is okay. I was on my way back from dropping off a DoorDash order, mainly because I still do deliveries when I want to make some extra cash to pay for equipment or other things. And this time I was actually out dashing for some extra cash to get gifts for my wife's upcoming birthday. We live in an area that's developing but still has some rural aspects to it, including a small cluster of little towns that still hold their traditional ways and looks. Without giving out too much detail on where we live, sometimes there are signs, flags even, that let you know an area isn't as welcoming as you'd hope. We avoid these places, but apps like DoorDash don't really differentiate an area as being dangerous or risky until enough people in that area mark it as such, or have issues with residents. Well, I ended up in one of these areas, and it was nighttime and raining heavily. Back roads are often 2 lanes and dark except for any illumination caused by your headlights, but I don't have a problem seeing at night, so I stuck it out to drive as long as I could, despite the rain. I ended up being cut off by a very old Ford pickup truck with a Confederate flag on the back of it, which started off behind me a distance and then quickly caught up to me and pulled into the opposite side traffic lane aggressively. The driver blew his horn and sped around my car. I could also see he had someone in his passenger seats, and at first I thought nothing of it. But they did seem to stay at my left-hand side for a few seconds longer than I liked. We were approaching a roundabout up ahead, and they of course gunned it to pass me, and went into the roundabout where they circled it twice, and then seemed to go on their way. I forgot all about it and went back to listening to one of Raven's older stories sent in by truckers, because it helps me to stay awake and I'm a fan. A few minutes passed and I realized that I didn't stop for gas like I intended to, and my needle was hovering on E and threatening to ruin my night. So, against better judgment, I pulled into one of the only gas stations I saw within the next 10 miles on the map. I parked at the pump and walked inside the store, where I immediately felt something was off as the cashier stared me down. He was an older Caucasian man, handlebar mustache, American flag bandana on his head, and he didn't seem to like that I walked in. I wasn't sure if he was on the phone or not, but I heard him say something along the lines of, "Hold on a minute," through a thick southern drawl, and then he went silent. I asked him for gas, told him what pump I was at, and he chuckled and shook his head. "You don't know where you're at, do you, boy?" he asked me. I didn't answer him, but I did give him a sharp glare back and then scoffed at him, and walked toward the door to exit when he decided to add to his statement. "I didn't say he couldn't get gas, but I would definitely suggest you hurry up before the wrong party sees it," he warned me. I turned to look at him, visibly irritated by his statement. "Since my tank's basically empty, I'll drop 10 for the tank and be on my way. I know the tells of not being welcome somewhere, but I don't have a choice," I told him and tossed a crumpled $10 bill on his counter. He didn't say anything to me, and I walked briskly across the parking lot to my car, where I pumped my gas and kept my eyes on the station ahead of me and the road behind me. I didn't like what he said about the wrong party, and I know a minor threat when I hear one. But I also realized I wasn't currently in a position where an altercation would be ideal. Technically, even though I had the GPS, I was still in the middle of nowhere and had a decent distance to go to get home. As soon as I was done pumping and was back inside my car, I heard the noisy engine of a truck roar up the road and into the parking lot of the gas station. And it was that same Ford with the Confederate flag on the back. And this time I could see it in its full glory. Red, rusted old truck easily from the 50s, with a complimentary Confederate license plate and several stickers on the back. most of which were images of guns and mantras like, "Come and take it." The one that read, "If you can read this, you're already dead," actually got to me. And I did start up my engine and begin to pull out of the parking lot as the two men emerged from the driver and passenger seat. I heard one of them yell something that sounded like, "Where you going, boy?" But I wasn't trying to stick around after that. I got back on the road and continued on my road trip back towards civilization. I don't know how long it was exactly, but I did end up back in an area that I knew, not too far from where I lived, and got a notification from DoorDash that I had an order to pick up from a local barbecue spot. It was for $25, and I hesitated, but if you know anything about dashing, when you have to spend some of your take on fuel, every sizable order after that looks ideal so you don't go home with less money. So I took the order. I pulled up to the barbecue place, went to the front counter, and avoided really dealing with anyone except the cashier, who was a younger lady with glasses. She informed me that my order was going to be ready in a few minutes and offered me to sit at the bar and wait for it, so that's what I did. The dining area was semi-empty with a few people here and there eating or watching one of the many big screens stationed on walls where the patrons could see them. After what felt like forever, the cashier brought me a big brown paper bag with the order that I was supposed to take, and I headed for the front door. It was still raining considerably, but by this point I really didn't care. Until I saw that same Ford pickup truck roar into the parking lot. This time they stayed at the entrance of the parking lot, engine running, and I felt like they were watching me specifically. It only got worse when I got into my car and left, and they followed me. DoorDash does have a service for letting them know when you feel unsafe on an order, but DoorDash's helpline can be unreliable at best whenever you need it. So instead, I called my wife and let her know what was happening. And I asked her to keep an eye on her Life 360 app, which both of us have since we both travel and drive for delivery apps alone sometimes. I hung up and kept an eye on my rearview mirror the entire time I navigated to the next stop, which took me a little out of the way from where I'd go to get home, but now I had another issue. They followed me up until I took a turn and entered a neighborhood to deliver the food, and then they drove off straight ahead. I thought, I wasn't sure if I was out of the woods at this point, but just as a note for any listeners, my wife and I have talked about crazy situations and plans to deal with them, and so we stayed prepared as much as we can. Our cars have dash cams, and we actually wear our own body cams when we drive, just as added evidence and security. We also have small backpacks we call fox packs, which are filled with supplies like flashlights, portable chargers, walkie-talkies, small toolkits, medkits, and yes, a few simple weapons of choice. We keep these items with us during our drives, just in case anything should happen. My wife actually has 2 different bags because she also rides a motorcycle, but I digress. As I exited the neighborhood, once I dropped off the food, I saw that the truck was actually waiting for me. And as soon as I turned right to get back onto the main road, they were right behind me again. At this point, I knew that I had enough evidence and confirmation that these guys were following me, so I actually did call 911. I told the dispatch my name, where I was currently heading, and that I was currently being followed by 2 guys in a truck with a gigantic Confederate flag on the back of it, and a brief description of the vehicle, driver, and passenger. They told me to stay on the line, and that where I was currently headed would intersect with patrols from the local town's police. A dispatch asked me if they were driving aggressively or using their vehicle to strike my own, and I told them that thus far they hadn't, but that they were bringing their truck all the way up to the rear of my car, which would make it impossible for me to slow down if I needed to. And I mentioned that I did have a dual-facing dash cam and recorded some of the activities of the night on it. Dispatch told me that officers were headed to my location and were going to intercept the vehicle that was tailing me in a few moments. And all I could do was keep on driving down the dark, rainy, 2-lane road until help arrived. I could hear the men whooping and saying indistinct things as they played this game, but all I could think was that they had no idea what was coming their way. In the distance, I did see headlights approaching quickly, and dispatch told me that an officer confirmed that he saw my car and the truck tailing me. The officer hit a sharp U-turn and flipped his lights on, which I guess spooked the two men in the truck, because they sped around me and took off down the road. But for some reason, the officer pulled up behind me and ordered me to pull over. He was from a small county in the area, and apparently he wanted to ask me questions about what happened, even though I told dispatch everything I could. So I cooperated, and even threw in that I had dashcam footage rolling the entire time and caught most of the action. The officer told me that we would get to that, and started asking me what I was doing out here at this time of night, where I lived and such. And before anyone says it, yes, I used to train police officers, and I understand there's a whole argument on what you should and shouldn't do, but in this situation, I kept my cameras going and took note that the officer let the two men escape. He took down my statements and information and said that their precinct would look into the situation, which I didn't believe. And I did ask the officer why he didn't pursue the men when he initiated a traffic stop and they fled. Well, look at who's using the big words, was all he had to say to me about that. He told me that his precinct had enough evidence to look into the pickup truck, including their license plate, and that they would handle it from there. He said they didn't need my dashcam footage, and even though he took down a statement from me, he didn't give me a card to confirm that there was an open case on the situation. I asked him about that, and he said that not every police station handles things the same way. Then told me that if they had any questions, they would give me a call. I insisted that something was off, and he told me flat to my face, "Don't go playing the hero or trying to make this a big issue. Be a good boy and stay out of trouble." When I tell you that my blood ran hot, that is an understatement. My wife was calling me at that point, so I did answer the phone, and the officer went back to his cruiser and left. As he passed, I saw him answering his personal phone with a grin on his face, and he sped off down the road. I told my wife what happened, and after a few minutes of literally fuming in anger, I went ahead and drove home. This is where my story ends, but just a heads up, there was a story that recently popped up in the local community group in our area about how apparently a man was found dead at the park on the 4th of July, and that the police were keeping the story out of the local news because they didn't want to cause a panic. Witnesses who found him reported seeing an old red pickup truck leaving that park in a hurry, but no one has been arrested nor identified. One of the shared photos circulating in the group was taken from a few yards away from the park, which was roped off by local police. In it, you see several officers, and the man that pulled me over that night standing right next to the mayor. I wanted to share the videos from my dash cam and body cam I have, but my wife said it's not a good idea because that officer purposefully let those men go, and got my information because I called the police on them. If I were to leak the footage, we believed it would have turned into a more severe situation. People can say what they wish, but the truth is, you don't know what you would do in a situation like that. And since these men aren't identified, and apparently the police don't care to stop them, it's an unfair advantage. We just won't be taking any more DoorDash orders in this area, and steering clear of dashing at night. So, today, I'm going to look into one of the most shocking and brutal serial killers in modern times. The things he did rocked an entire nation in the wake of a very difficult time in the entire region. When these crimes began to take place, the Arab Spring was just starting to wind down and de-escalate. So while the people of Cairo were used to petty street crimes, theft, harassment, scams and cons, or even a certain level of political violence and unrest, when this serial killer struck, it blew everyone's minds. The police at the time were especially concerned with projecting the image of being orderly and well in control of public safety. After the craziness during the Arab Spring, they very much needed to protect that image. So in 2017, when they discovered evidence of incredibly shocking crimes, after some inconsistent statements in relation to missing persons cases, the police finally searched the home of one Radi Mohammed Abdelrahman and found human remains buried both under the floors and in his yard. In some cases, for years, families of these missing people had been pushing for justice, looking for answers. The discovery of the crimes wasn't exactly amazing police work, or as a result of any kind of intensive investigations. Once he was arrested, Roddy confessed to a number of murders. While there's heavy suspicion that he was guilty of other disappearances and subsequently other murders, he was only ever convicted of 4. Although, regardless of how many he was convicted of, it was definitely enough because in 2019 he was convicted of 4 murders and sentenced to death. Roddy tried to appeal the sentence, but it was upheld in court, and in 2021, the Butcher of Giza was executed by hanging in a prison in Giza. Now, just what were the crimes that earned a man a date with the gallows? Well, they were pretty horrific. The crimes themselves were brutal, but perhaps the most disturbing thing is how Roddy dealt with his crimes in the aftermath. He literally managed to continue living a seemingly normal life while at the same time living amongst the remains of his victims, and some of them buried right underneath the floor he walked on. The crimes themselves took place over about 2 years, starting in 2015. The Butcher of Gaza's first victim was one of his own childhood friends, whereas the majority of Roddy's victims were women that were attached to him through promises of marriage or financial stability. Rita was a longtime friend. Their relationship was based on financial matters and mutual trust. While Rita's family didn't approve of his friendship with Roddy, who they felt took advantage of Rita's generosity, and generous is what Rita was, especially with people close to him, oftentimes lending his friends large sums of money. I will take a beat here to say that a lot of the more personal details of the victims have not been reported to the Egyptian media. Only the first names of the victims are given, so sadly I do not know Rita's family name or any of the victims that came after him. Although, I think maybe that's the most dignified way to present the case. For a long time, Rita's friendship with Roddy was fairly stable. As I said, it was built upon a mutual kind of trust between the longtime friends. However, in 2015, Rita would make what turned out to be a fatal mistake. He confronted Roddy about repayment. He was pressuring Roddy to at least make a show of good faith. Instead, what happened was that Roddy would lure his friend into a situation under the promise of settling accounts. Rita arrived at his friend's apartment expecting recompense. What he received was a violent blow to the back of his head, according to most reports. Other reports suggest possible strangulation was involved, but the dominant narrative is blunt force. What is usually agreed upon is that it was a very violent death directly tied to a financial dispute. When the Butcher of Giza went to remove his first victim, it was a bit different to later crimes, as he didn't bury his friend under the floorboards or even on his property. Rita was buried on a different property. For years, when he was confronted about Rita's disappearance, Roddy would just state that Rita had left the country or had just disappeared. He was hopeful that this kind of narrative would curb any future inquiries. It was the opposite that occurred, though, as Rita's family would continually hound the police about the disappearance for years after. One of the earliest victims that was traced directly to the Butcher of Giza, Nawal's case is a bit unique among the Butcher's victims. Nawal was more intimately connected to the killer. Nawal was a woman in her 40s that had actually been in a pretty serious relationship with Roddy. However, once Nawal began to press him on marriage, wanting to cement their relationship in a more permanent way, well, that was her fatal mistake. In 2015, Nawal was lured to Roddy's apartment. Once she was there, the butcher attacked her. According to the report, she was struck in the head. The truly tragic part is what came after. Once Nawal was dead, the butcher buried her under the floor of his apartment, where her body would remain for 2 years. In the aftermath of Nawal's disappearance, Roddy maintained that she had left the country to find work abroad. In Egypt, where people migrating to find work in other countries is commonplace to most people, this sounded completely plausible. Nawal's family, however, was never convinced by his story, and much like Rita's family, Nawal's family continued to pressure the police to keep investigating. Faten was a kind-hearted young woman from Giza, who would also most unfortunately fall into the orbit around the butcher. She became friends with Roddy and became a confidant and good friend to the butcher. Much like Rita, Faten was very trusting of the people close to her, and had the utmost faith in them. Unlike Nawal, Faten's connection to Roddy wasn't romantic. In fact, it was a completely platonic relationship that was based on trust and closeness. Faten often went to Roddy for advice or to confide in him. The fact that they were so close, and that there was so much trust between them, made what happened to Faten all the more terrible and completely sinister. The butcher would ultimately lead her to one of the properties he was using. Once Faten arrived, he again struck her in the head with the blunt object, and then he would conceal her body in the same building where Nawal was buried. Of course, Faten's family found her sudden disappearance both inexplicable and very shocking. Roddy, however, was able to pretty successfully keep up the ruse of being her trusted friend, etc. Faten's family wouldn't learn of her true fate for 2 years, when her remains were found at the same time as Nawal's. The final person that the butcher was convicted of killing was Yasmin, a 20-year-old woman from Giza. She was the youngest of his victims. Yasmin was working at a clothing store at the time of her death. Family and friends say that she was ambitious and had high hopes for a more stable future, and she was willing to put in the hard work to get there. Unlike Rita, Nawal, or Faten, Yasmin wasn't bound to Roddy by some kind of long, intimate history, but she was friendly enough with him that she made the fatal mistake of trusting him. There are some conflicting reports as to just how he managed to lure her into his web. Some say he had told her that he could or was going to arrange a job for her. Others say he was trying to propose marriage. And yet others say that he was offering her the prospect of some kind of new start. Whatever carrot he dangled in front of her, he unfortunately got exactly what he wanted. It was in 2017 when Yasmin, the last confirmed victim of the Butcher of Giza, disappeared. Much as with Nawal or Faten, he lured her to his Giza apartment and killed her with a blunt force strike to her head. That pattern always remained consistent among the confirmed victims of Roddy. After she was dead, she too joined Nawal and Faten under the tiled floor of the apartment. As with the other three, Roddy tried to spin a story that Yasmin had left the country to begin fresh somewhere far away. Yasmin's family was never even remotely trusting of his story. It would be completely out of character for the young woman to do something like that. Ultimately, it was the disappearance of Yasmin and the relentless urging of her family to investigate further that would ultimately lead to Roddy's discovery and arrest. For some of the families, they were for the first time learning just what had happened after years of not knowing. Each one of these deaths is tragic and completely pointless. There was nothing to be gained by any of them, really. I think in the case of Rita, the killing was less about the money, and almost certainly an impulsive decision by Roddy. And that's all Tom K's personal speculation. In most cases like this, there has been something brewing beneath the surface for a long time, and then a catalyzing event will happen, and that's when they explode and do something such as cracking a trusted friend in the head with a blunt object. Again, I can't say for certain that is the case. That's just the general pattern of these kinds of stories. So, there it is, the story of Rita, Nawal, Faten, and Yasmin. 4 human beings with loved ones and dreams of a better future robbed of everything by one incredibly disturbed and selfish man. the Butcher of Giza. But I'm not going to let him have the last word here, so thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you as always to my dear friend Raven. Much love to you all. Dear As the Raven Dreams, this is a true horror story that involves child abuse and very adult situations. So please note that this story is really for people 18 years and over. If listeners do not want to listen to a story like this, we suggest they skip over this one. Thank you. Consider that your content or trigger warning for this story, child abuse and adult situations, and from what I've read, some situations of violence as well. So, just a note. My name is Carolyn, and I will not use anybody's real last name in my story for privacy reasons, except Father Flanagan, who was the pastor of my church. The story all happened in a small town of West Virginia when I was 10 years old in 1972. In 1972, Richard Nixon was the 37th President of the United States, with Spiro Agnew as his vice president. My father was a businessman in West Virginia, and he made a good living for my mother and I. I was the only child and had no siblings. My father was into coal and energy sources in West Virginia, which still had a good coal industry in the 1970s that still exists today. But today it can't be just coal. It has to be other energy sources too. The West Virginia coal mines in Appalachia were just up the mountains from where we lived. You could smell the coal in the air, especially when it was breezy. I loved living in West Virginia. We had a good sense of community, and I had a lot of friends to play with. On Sunday, my family, along with many other families, went to church where Father Homer Flanagan was the pastor. Father Flanagan was a nice and calm-speaking man who looked 100 years old to me at the time, because I was only a child, but was 50 years old in real life. He was around 6 foot tall with a bald head, wearing round glasses on a thin build. Under Father Flanagan, we enjoyed church functions like annual summer picnics, church donations for the needy, and outside baptisms. I especially enjoyed the church picnic where I played with friends, and there was an abundance of good food to eat. Father Flanagan even took some kids up a ride in his back of his old Model T pickup truck on these functions, putting hay in the back of the truck, making it more fun. Father Flanagan was a widower. His wife died a few years before. His home was right behind the church, which was a nice, brown-in-color, country-style home built in the 1920s, with a white picket fence surrounding the property, and a nicely mowed lawn. He also had well-manicured bushes and a nice garden. Father Flanagan sometimes invited my family for supper on Sundays, where we would have chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, rice, gravy, corn on the cob with lemonade on the side. He often made a delicious dessert of pumpkin pie, lemon pie, apple pie, or chocolate cake waiting for us after our meal. Father Flanagan was a good cook. I also liked all the old photographs he had around the house of his parents and grandparents. I especially liked the big picture of him and his wife, with his wife sitting outside of their home on a chair, and him standing proudly beside her, both dressed in their Sunday best. The picture must have been taken in the 1940s when he and his wife were very young. Next to the big picture, sitting on the table, was an old Vitaphone record player that still played records. Remember that this was the early 70s, before the computer age, so no computer, cell phones, or answering machines at this time. All was going well in my life in West Virginia, until it didn't. It all started innocently enough when Father Flanagan saw me playing outside alone one weekend and asked me if I would like to help him with his garden since I liked gardens so much. I readily agreed. I did love beautiful gardens, and I loved to help my mother do hers often. Father Flanagan's garden was indeed beautiful. It had beautiful insects, like a couple of monarch butterflies and bumblebees flying around them. After I finished helping Father Flanagan in his garden, he asked me if I wanted to come inside his house for a little dessert treat before I went home. I readily agreed. I knew Father Flanagan was a great cook like my mom and had something good for me to eat inside of his house. At first, though, I washed my hands before I sat down in anticipation on what he was going to serve me. It almost felt like the female version of Charlie of the Chocolate Factory, because there were so many good homemade things to eat at Father Flanagan's house. But would unfortunately find out soon that appearances can be deceiving, even deadly. When I sat down in the chair, I spotted a delicious-looking pecan pie, but it only had 2 pieces of it left, so I thought, better let Father Flanagan finish it. I also saw some very tasty-looking chocolate chip oatmeal cookies in a glass-covered plate. Behave, Carolyn. Don't be too greedy for the scrumptious delights, I thought secretly to myself. As I looked at Father Flanagan in anticipation on what he would serve me, he then said, "How about a nice ice cream cone, little missy? It's hot and you look like you could use one." He said this to me with a smile. This was in the month of May, and the day was hot. "That sounds great," I replied, gushing excitedly. "What flavors do you have?" "Well, let's see. Vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry," he replied, beaming at me. "I'll have chocolate. That's my favorite." Father Flanagan looked at me happily as he began making my ice cream quickly. "Coming right up," he replied. When Father Flanagan gave me my ice cream cone, he had put an assortment of ice cream sprinkles on it that I loved as I started to eat it. When I was eating the ice cream, Father Flanagan surprised and embarrassed me in telling me what a pretty little girl he thought I was. He loved my golden mane of hair and ocean blue eyes. He also went on to say that my body had blossomed very well for my age group, much more so than the other girls in church, and that he also liked all the pretty dresses that I wore. I looked up at Father Flanagan, smiling at first, trying to be polite, when my focus all of a sudden started to get blurry, and my head started to spin. I felt a bit sick to my stomach. The chocolate ice cream still tasted delicious, but yet, underneath it all, it had a sour taste. Father Flanagan must have put something in it, must have spiked it, I thought to myself. And I suddenly passed out right at the table. The next time I woke up, I was in a nice pink little girl's bedroom, under the covers with no clothes on, with a big teddy bear and a big doll on the bed beside me. On the table next to the bed, there was a toy pink phone. There was also a big swing hanging from the ceiling, even a carnival-like mini popcorn machine maker. The room looked like a child's fantasy room. I then looked up at Father Flanagan, himself smiling and standing over me. "Where am I?" I said to him, startled. Father Flanagan told me I was in a bedroom that he had made just for me to play and sleep when I came to visit him. He assured me that there was no need to be afraid and that he was just washing my clothes in the laundry that were dirty from gardening, and that I would get them back soon. He also told me that he called my parents about all this. "I put you in bed because you needed a little sleep is all. You still look tired from gardening. I'll turn off the lights for a few more hours so you can sleep, and then I'll bring you back your clothes and you can leave," he said to me, smiling. I nodded my head weakly. I was still tired and needed more sleep, but it did seem like something funny was in that chocolate ice cream that he had served me to cause me to be like this. Father Flanagan turned off the lights and left the room. But 2 minutes later, I heard the door creak open again and was surprised and shocked that Father Flanagan started getting into bed next to me. And even more shocked that he was naked, with himself fully there. It was darkened in the room, but I could still see well enough. "Carolyn, you're such a pretty girl. I've had my eyes on you for quite a while now. After tonight, you won't be a girl, but a woman," he said seriously. You might want to hold your teddy bear doll tight for a moment. It'll only hurt for a minute," he said. As soon as he said this, I hugged my big teddy bear tight and gritted my teeth as, well, you know what happened next. And you know how severe this was, as I was still a child. But I didn't know all this at the time. After this, Father Flanagan cleaned me up as I went back to sleep. After a few hours, Father Flanagan came back with my clothes. While I was putting them back on, he had me do a pinky promise that I would never tell my parents what had happened here. He also told me that this playroom was mine, and I could come any time to play there when I wanted to. I nodded my head and started to smile, since the child's bedroom and playroom did look inviting, and it did seem like something I'd want to come and play in. As a child, I did what Father Flanagan promised, and I didn't tell my parents about the assault. I was a child and I didn't know any better. Like I said before, the playroom looked so inviting with the swing and the stuffed teddy bears and dolls. I actually did go back. Father Flanagan often took photos of me with his camera playing with the teddy bears, the dolls, on the swing and phone, and he even got me to pose without clothes for him on occasion too. He kept telling me that I was so grown up now, so this wouldn't be a problem anymore if I posed for him like this from time to time. He also got me some new toys in various colors of pretty dresses, including a sailor suit dress that I loved. How could a little girl say no to all this? As I posed in the child bedroom and playroom in front of a big mirror in the clothes he bought for me, and all of this I see now was just more candy to keep me as his little plaything in his secret bedroom. This is all very sad, looking back at it. I was just a scared little 10-year-old girl trying way too hard to be an adult for an adult man that was far too old for me. This was child endangerment. It was against the law for me as a child to be with an adult man like this in the first place. But again, I didn't really know any better then. There was one thing that I discovered under the rug by accident when I was playing alone in the bedroom for a while. Under the rug was a medium-sized hatch, a floor doorway. I knew the father would leave me alone to play for at least 30 more minutes, so I decided to go through this hatch and down the darkened steps, and when I turned on the lights, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. There were old photographs on a table of little girls my age from probably the early 40s to 1972. And the last photo was myself, Carolyn, smiling that he took of me recently and framed. I felt like screaming in absolute terror and shock when I saw this. What's more, above the smiling child table photos were undressed females posing sexually. No doubt for Father Flanagan. Some photos were in black and white and some were in color. The oldest ones went back to the early 1940s, and that wasn't all that I saw. On the side of the table, there were some old and crinkly newspaper articles of some girls found dead and strangled in the woods of West Virginia, nude, with their bodies violated. Articles again from the 1940s to the 1970s. I took a moment to look at all the pictures and the old articles of the girls, and a big chill went up my spine. Again, I felt like screaming my lungs out, but I held it all inside. My thoughts about Father Flanagan were correct. Father Flanagan was a pedo. And now I was finding out, a murderer for years also. I surely was not the only female child that the pastor had assaulted in this small West Virginia town. He'd obviously done this for many, many years now, and had never been caught. Never been discovered, maybe. Possibly his deceased wife may have known, but didn't let in on the church community since this was a close and tight-knit West Virginia small town. And often back then, good church-going ladies often kept their mouths shut, especially with matters involving men. many small towns do have their terrible secrets. Maybe quiet whispers scattered about by some townspeople, but most kept their mouths shut. After seeing all this, and after the assaults, despite enjoying my big bedroom playroom, I'd had enough. I had to tell my parents about the evils of Father Flanagan, and quickly before I threw up all over the floor in disgust. This was truly frightening and sickening, especially for a young child such as I at the time. I had just made it up the old stairs, closed the floor door, and put the rug over it just in time before Flanagan came through the door. He didn't even knock, just came in smiling devilishly. At first, I thought he might violate me again, but he said it was time for me to go home, or my parents would ask a lot of questions on where I was. He offered me a ride home, but I decided to walk home since it was close enough, with walking distance away. On my way home, though walking down a path, I stopped to sit down and I cried. I had to let it all out. One of my male friends, whose name was Timmy, was a few years older than I was. He was in 8th grade. He was a well-built and muscular kid, and he saw me crying and sat down next to me as I told him what had happened. Timmy was a nice guy, but he did have a bit of a temper that showed itself sometimes. But he was also the sort of guy who would fight for you if you were his friend. He always had your back. Timmy told me to go home and that he would take care of everything, because his father was a policeman. Looking back at this, I should have told my parents first. Making it worse, I let my friend Timmy, who was a kid himself, try to handle a huge problem such as this. When I got home, I told my parents everything that had happened, and Timmy's father, who was a policeman, would handle the matter. The bad thing that happened, though, 2 days later, I heard that Father Flanagan was actually found dead in his own bed with his neck broken. His eyes and mouth were wide open. My father asked questions around town on what happened to the pastor and who killed him, since Timmy and his dad couldn't be found at the time. One townsperson told him that it was Timmy, my friend, who had murdered Father Flanagan and broke his neck with his strong bare hands because of what had happened to me and the other girls that Flanagan had abused and murdered. Timmy's father was a policeman, who protected him for being prosecuted for murder, and the whole thing was eventually pushed under the rug. No prosecution or prison time at all for Timmy. Nothing. My family and a few townspeople were the only ones who ever knew about who killed Father Flanagan. In fact, most of the townspeople thought that the murderer might have been a hobo from a train, or someone asking Father Flanagan for money, and they broke into his home and killed him, because Father Flanagan was hesitant to let them in. Once again, most townsfolk did not even know it was their own townsfolk Timmy who did it, because Timmy was nice to everybody. The type of kid to cut your grass in the spring and summer and shovel your snow in winter or paint your fence for you. Nobody would have suspected that he was ever part of any murder, but tragically he was. Timmy and his father, the policeman, just acted regular around town like it was tragic. That they were not part of Father Flanagan's death. About a year later, I guess to further protect his son, Timmy's family moved out of West Virginia for parts unknown, and I never saw Timmy again. I did want Timmy's help, but not like that. Timmy's temper caused him to make rash decisions. He didn't even tell his dad, the cop, that Flanagan was a pedo and a murderer until Timmy had already taken him out. I wish that Timmy hadn't lost his head and decided to kill Father Flanagan himself. Just have his dad arrest Flanagan and let the courts deal with it. I think Timmy's dad probably wished this also. I think Timmy decided to murder him knowing his father's being a cop would protect him from going to prison, and he was right. Especially in small-town West Virginia such as this. I guess Timmy wrongly thought that it was right to take matters into his own hands and do away with Father Flanagan himself in a small-town justice kind of thing. One thing that I was happy about, though, Flanagan could no longer harm or murder a little kid again. This all happened a long time ago, in a small town in West Virginia. As for me, I'm now a happy grandmother and I no longer live in that small town, West Virginia. And thank you for listening to my story. Hi, Raven. As they say, long-time listener, first-time submitter. I have a few stories to submit, but we'll start with the one that I often forget about because it was, frankly, so far out of left field for the kinds of things that happen, or rather don't happen, in my life. While I've had plenty of things happen that make me question the world we live in terms of spirituality, the Matrix, etc., this one was boiled down to simply mental illness, I believe. And while it wasn't necessarily scary in some of the other ways I've heard scary stories on the podcast, it was certainly weird, so feel free to use it or not use it as you see fit. On to the story. I was attending school at my local community college, wrapping up the 3 classes that I needed to complete as a 22-ish-year-old that had previously dropped out due to not knowing what the heck I was even going to school for. I had college credits from my high school days that were going to expire if I didn't obtain a degree, and so I begrudgingly signed up for the final 3 classes that I needed, as I knew I would like to continue with school eventually, and knew that this would save me both time and money in the long run. The story takes place in my Composition 2 class. The semester goes by fairly normal. The class is taught by an older woman, I guess probably in her mid to late 50s. She's on the slender side with graying hair and is one of those teachers that has a very specific way she wants to run her class, expects you to behave in class, and for how you'll turn in your work. Most of the people in this class are young adults, 18 or 19 years old with a few exceptions, myself being one of them. While being young and defiant isn't an unusual trait, I would say that I've been told that I was more headstrong than a bull at this age, and so I'm sure you can guess that I was not particularly fond of her rules for the sake of having rules. That said, I was an A student all throughout high school and college, and I wasn't going to break my streak now, so I found loopholes as needed throughout the semester. The teacher and I didn't fight per se, but I would push boundaries. Fast forward to the second to last day of class. We're supposed to be writing an essay for our final, and we have 2 days to do it. The classroom is silent as everyone faces their school-provided computers and types away. This was about 10 years ago, so every student having their own computer to bring to class wasn't necessarily common, though it was gaining traction. Maybe half to 3/4 of the way through the hour-long class, the teacher comes up to me and asks if she can talk to me in the hall. I tell her sure, and to be honest, I assumed she was going to grill me about being on my phone throughout the semester, and finally wanted to just lay it into me before she likely never saw me again. So, I'm mentally gearing up for this conversation in the few moments I have, as I follow her out to the hallway. She goes and sits down on a bench nearby and asks me to sit with her. I do, and she begins to start telling me about her husband and a therapist. It wasn't clear if it was her therapist, his, or theirs. How she had pictures and how she needed help. As you can imagine, I'm about as confused as it gets, both in terms of what she's telling me and why I'm the one she's telling it to, given my general attitude in the class. Treading carefully, I tell her that I can try and get her some help. I ask if there's someone I can call for her. She tells me no. She can't call anyone because they might be listening. After circling around this a few more times with nothing ever really making more sense to me, she finally says to me, "Didn't my people talk to your people? They told me they were going to." If you're wondering who any of the theys are, or who my people or her people are, congrats, you're as confused as I was in this moment. I tell her no, that no one has contacted me. At this point, she reiterates that she needs help and adds that she has to hide. And she can't go to her place or take her car because they are watching. She asks if I can take her to my home in my car. Stupidly, out of, I assume, shock, I say yes. I lived in Iowa at the time, and stuff like this just didn't and doesn't, I still live in Iowa, really happen here, so the shock factor is real. So then she asks me, a student, and still very young adult myself, tough girl image aside, what she should do about her class. I tell her that she should just let them know that she's dismissing class early. She goes up and does this, collects her things, and we go to my car and, again, stupidly, I take her to my house. I was at a loss for what to do or how to help her, having honestly never dealt with anything remotely close to this in my life prior, and not having much knowledge on how mental illness can truly present itself. My justification aside, this was just dumb. Finally, I'm starting to get some sense back once we're at my house. I lived very close to the school, so probably only 30 or so minutes have elapsed since she pulled me out of the class. I told her to stay there and that I had to go run an errand, which was true. I shouldn't have left her in my house alone. Another stupid thing, but I also felt like I needed to get help, and I didn't feel like I could call anybody in front of her. I got in my car to run the quick errand and immediately called my mother, who, thankfully, is a very sane and grounded woman, and immediately provided some direction to my addled brain. She told me that I should not have left the woman in my house. She could be planting drugs or any number of crazy things, she said, understandably. And that she was going to call the school, and after verifying that I didn't feel in danger, suggested that I go back home and bring her back to the school. I want to clarify that if I had not felt safe, either my mother or I would have called the police, and that she was in no way suggesting I go back into the situation that I was scared to be in. So my mother and I did the things she said. She quickly called back after calling the school and told me where to drop the teacher off at. Back at my home, I convinced her that, quote, my people, cleared us to go back to the school where they could help her. I dropped her off with the security guard and left in a daze. I didn't hear much about what exactly happened to her other than she was going to get the help that she needed. I did get pulled out of my night class later that day in front of everyone, which was dramatic as you can imagine, and I had to give a statement to the night dean and head of security. Afterwards, my night class teacher held me after class and tried to let me know that she was here in case I needed to talk about anything. To this day, I'm not sure if she meant it or was just curious about what happened. But either way, I thanked her and didn't comment. I didn't tell anyone at the school outside of the dean and security what happened as I felt bad for the woman, and honestly, awkward for myself. The last day of English class, there was a substitute teacher for our final. I couldn't even tell you the original teacher's name to try and look her up now, but this was such a wild experience that I often forget it even happened to me. I will say that this experience did make me much more aware of what to do in surprising situations like this. So, while it certainly wasn't ideal, I'm in a way glad that a safe, crazy experience happened to me. It's easy to say you'll do XYZ when something happens to you, but it's so much different in the moment than it is just thinking about it. The situation helped prepare me to be much more on my toes, regardless of shock, and I'm sure it helped me navigate life in a much safer way that I potentially would not have if I had not had this experience. Oh, and for those of you wondering, I did get my associate's degree from the community college. After taking an approximately 2-year break, I also enrolled in a 4-year school at the age of 25, completed my bachelor's, and then continued on to get my master's and found relevant employment in my field. Not knowing what you want to do right away out of high school can feel scary too, as well as dropping out of college, which I also did. So, there's a little mini scary story with a happy ending in there as well. And thanks for listening and reading if this makes it, and stay safe. And as always, my friends, that was a collection of, I don't even know, disturbing, creepy encounter stories. Some very disturbing, creepy encounter stories this time around. Probably will title it that, because these ones were just, they weren't your run-of-the-mill creeps. These ones were all very out there and messed up, and I think disturbing is the best way to describe it, so. Anyways, don't really have anything to talk about today. It's 8 o'clock on the 19th of September that I'm recording this, so a little ahead, obviously. I like being ahead. I've been trying to keep ahead this entire month. Hopefully, you all are enjoying the daily content. If you are enjoying the daily content, please consider hitting that like button. Actually, you know what? I do want to say something. This video will go live on the last day of September, which marks the end of September, which is crazy. I mean, obviously, the last day of September will be the end of September, but that will have put me at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 days of content in a row. Now, mind you, that does include my live streams. I hope you guys all realized that by now. That's 17 days in, and we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 more days to go. Yeah. Hopefully you guys are liking the daily content. Hopefully it's doing something for the channel and doing something for you. So, again, if you are liking it, please hit the like button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. That'd be pretty awesome. You can also leave me a comment with your thoughts. Maybe not so much on these stories, because, again, very disturbing stories. So, how about your thoughts and how you're doing? And if you have any plans for October, since October starts tomorrow when this video goes live. Yeah. So, let me know if you have any plans. I'd like to hear them. You can subscribe to the channel if you're new. You can go to astheravendreams.com, where you can send in all your stories if you have them. Or you can email them to astheravendreams@gmail.com. If you do go to astheravendreams.com, you can also find where the platforms where the podcast is and other formats, longer formats. You can also find all the social media links. That's what I was trying to say. My brain was going blank there. All my social media links, and submit your stories right there as well. So, yeah. Well, that's it, friends. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important. The world is a much better place with you in it. And please do not forget that. And if you ever need someone to remind you, just let me know. I'll remind you. Until next time, my friends, much love and sleep well.